All right, we are live, and this is our next video in an ongoing effort to make people aware of many different things concerning the cannabis world and to help with perspective. This is another opportunity to cross over into a couple different topics, and I'm happy to introduce Leaha Skylar. She is the chair for the Cannabis Caucus. Otherwise very politically involved, and she is the legislative and policy director for Representative Jimmie Wilson Jr.'s office, a freshman representative who is friendly to our cause. Hopefully be working with him over the next few years quite a bit. But we get to talk about advocacy and kind of a Michigan State legislature update as it pertains to cannabis. And so I'll kind of like give a brief update on what my awareness is of what's going on, and then Leaha, as somebody who works on staff for a lawmaker, can then let us know, from her perspective, what's missing or what else we should know.
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of your focus and involvement in cannabis, you have done that plus many other things for a long time. But in part, and I think it's an important story for people to know historically, you were best friends with a woman named Zara Abbas, and she was a great advocate, and I mean that in the strongest sense of the word, for cannabis and many other things, but certainly for cannabis. She was Muslim. She was traditional in a lot of ways, wore the hijab, and we didn't have that type of representation in our diverse community. There are other, Muslim people or traditional who do use cannabis, but very few that active and out front and willing to share their testimony. She very much benefited from using cannabis for health reasons. We unfortunately lost her, a few months ago. And I know that you're in part driven by filling in a lot of the energy that she brought, here. And it's very much appreciated by many of us, of course, because I'm aware of how competent and driven you are within that world, and the only person probably able to pick up some of the slack from the work that Zara was doing. And so that's very much appreciated. And I'm happy to work with you on the Cannabis Caucus directly. And the whole Meds family, supports myself and others, participating in this type of activity. And I'd like to let people know about that. But yeah, if you want to know a little bit more about your own, motivations and what's going on, with the caucus and that type of thing.
Yeah. So I will tell you, you're completely correct. I grew up in a really conservative, traditional family. That cannabis was not the thing you do, right? And I had reached the point throughout college that this did have medicinal purposes, but I met Zahara Abbas in 2018, and it was really my first time seeing someone that broke every stereotype of like a cannabis user, who really took the time to educate me on the medicinal properties. And that led to her introducing me to people like yourself, Jamie. And I don't think I would be in this space had she not taken that time to educate me. And the Cannabis Caucus is another moment where Zahara decided I needed to be there, and she nominated me, accepted my nomination for me, and I became secretary of the caucus a few years ago. And that led me to really finding out about all these different avenues and elements and intersections of the cannabis world. And the Cannabis Caucus does a lot of direct work with the Democratic Party in the state of Michigan. We focus really heavily on finding those legislatures that are friendly, like my boss, Rep. Wilson, because a lot of the times the things that we're discussing in our like advocacy circles, our rallies, they weren't always getting into the rooms in the Capitol. They weren't always getting into the meeting rooms in the House office building and the Senate building. And the Cannabis Caucus is really trying to create that avenue to really get us in that room consistently. Because, there's things that we need to focus on. And we're fortunate to partner with a lot of other advocacy groups. There's a member, that one group that we're a member of is the Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition. And that has been a really unique space to start bringing a lot of different advocacy groups under like one silo. And we've done some really great work through that group in reentry support and in clemency requests and pushing for more access to expungement. Because now that we have medical and recreational cannabis in the state of Michigan, we still have people that were harmed by the war on drugs. We still have communities to make whole. We still have people to support and get better job connections and housing and just kind of in these rooms to continue telling their stories and not forget these people that were harmed by policies for so long. So I would argue we spend time educating the public, legislatures, party people, and just kind of trying to get them to realize that there's more to cannabis than just like, oh, yay, it's passed, it's medical, it's rec. We've got some making whole that we need to do. And then we've got some groups that we want to keep in the center. We really focus on our caregivers. We really focus on our patients. And a big focus of mine now being in the chair position is going to be our pediatric cannabis patients. And really, again, keeping their stories in the center. Without Zahara having used cannabis as her medication for epilepsy, I don't know if we would have gotten as far into breaking some stigmas down. And she found it after trying everything else. And that's what a lot of these pediatric patients say is I tried everything else. And a lot of times they try it out of desperation. And we're trying to create a community that they can come and ask questions and learn from. And we can connect them to a caregiver, or we can connect them to like a pediatric community base, because this is new, right? And we want to like welcome these people in. So all these groups work together. And I'm just really fortunate to be in the space, I think, because it is a really diverse space. And we are trying to find ways to even further that diversity. A personal goal for the caucus, I know, is to have more representation of women in the conversation, and definitely bring in more representation from our Black and Brown communities, going back to who do we need to make whole from that war on drugs. We need to be better about making sure we're opening doors and pulling up chairs for those communities as well.
Right on. I'll point out under this role, you were invited into a meeting with Justice Bernstein recently, and he just reminded me. As you crossed into the larger issues that cannabis is involved with, and there was a lot of controversy recently with Justice Bernstein when newly appointed Justice Bolden was hiring her staff, and it included somebody who was a former felon and who, as part of the story, fired upon police. But it was somebody who had been through such a rough time, but had also worked really hard to get in the position to get like such a good job, like with a Supreme Court justice in the Justice Building, and with some prestige and with some responsibility that's meaningful. And he really weirdly worked against that, and very publicly
he missed
said
the
he
message.
didn't like it. Yeah, it was. And when we came into that meeting, because you invited me to be there also, and he kind of said he wanted to reach out to these groups, and we're thinking that we're going to have a discussion, on cannabis. And Amy Carter, of course, was there, and talking about pediatric, work and stuff. And we get going, and he spends the entire time apologizing for that. But I remember you told him, I don't remember that, of course, quoting it verbatim, but it was something to the effect, like, I'm glad you witnessed. I'm glad you realize this as a mistake, because when it comes to like the reform efforts that we're involved in, and seeing somebody actually get through this disadvantageous criminal justice system and still get themselves in a position to do something meaningful like this, we think that's a victory, and we support that. And just contradictory, and he said, you're right. And I, and it came to me, and I was like, hey, I didn't really expect to discuss this issue, but I'm happy that you changed your perspective. And he's like, not only did I change my perspective, I gained a passion to work, to better reform these issues. And we'll see what he does, but
well, I think that's why creating those relationships that I was alluding to becomes so important, because do I wish that Justice Bernstein had maybe touched base first to be like, should I be angry about this? Yeah, that would have been nice, right? But I will say that he met with the Cannabis Caucus. He met with other groups that I'm involved in, a variety of local Democratic groups. And I think it's important that we stay in communication and put pressure on our electeds when they do mess up and harm our advocacy efforts. But I also think that's why we build that relationship, so that we end up in that room with Justice Bernstein to educate him about.
And you say elected, our state Supreme Court is elected. I mean,
Yes, every
just to be
8
clear.
years,
Yeah.
they have elections, and Justice Bolden will actually be up for election much sooner because she was an appointment. So I believe it's in 2024 we will see her.
Somebody left. She was appointed to take over the position, and she finishes out their term.
Correct.
And then has to run again. But as an incumbent, you typically do a little bit better in those
Typically,
elections.
yes. I mean, another thing that I would mention is like we've made good progress with having relationships with the Attorney General's office. You know, we alluded to our relationships with House reps, but also state senators. Zahara did a wonderful job. And also I will give Colin McDougall credit for really making a lot of inways with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who will now come to like hash bash events and speak.
You worked on her campaign.
I did. I was Congresswoman Dingell's field director for our new Congressional District 6 this last cycle. But, you know, those are individuals that, you know, Congresswoman Dingell was not always interested in this discussion or this community. And again, someone like Zahara that broke almost all those typical stereotypes, showing up in her office going, "This is my medicine," is really a big part of what got her to realize, okay, this is where we need to go. And so again, having those relationships, putting effort on those people, because they're in rooms that frankly you and I could scream and yell and still won't get into, right? And so we need to scream and yell in their ears, so when they're in those rooms, it's what we have been telling them and educating them and working with them on that they're sharing.
Right on. And that kind of segues, I think, into our discussion on what's going on in the state legislature. And I like to, you know, be involved in these issues. Last session, we were confronted with some challenges and, you know, kind of, you know, had to take on some stuff. Some things got through that we didn't particularly like, but the really damaging things were stopped. There's some victories there. We come into this new legislative session with a different composition of lawmakers. The gerrymandering districts were changed. And I think in part that led to, there's other political reasons too, but in part that led to a change in majority. And my discussions with a few different lawmakers in the Senate, a couple in the House, is that I get the sense that we're probably not going to be facing any seriously stupid challenges this session. We might not necessarily see a nice long list of reforms and more broadening of some policies as many of us would like to see either. There are some discussions for the Jaden's bill, and we bring up Amy Carter a little. She's the mother of Jaden, who's a pediatric patient, and that's what the bill is named after, and that's to allow pediatric patients to use their cannabis medicine on school grounds along with everybody else who gets administered medicine. And it just seems to make sense, although it went through the whole last session without much energy. But your office is going to be involved in reintroducing that. So that's one thing we know of, right?
So I will touch on the fact that like it is a new composition up there. So I will say this week, particularly, the Democratic Party delivered on a lot of campaign promises. So like the energy is great. And I think that that will help us to move on some of these reform efforts because, you know, Jaden's Law, for instance, it's not that people didn't like it. It's just that it sat in a committee because we had, you know, a leadership that wasn't interested in discussing it. I don't even know exactly why. They just simply weren't.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but my understanding is that you have two bills actually.
Yes,
change the education code.
Companion bills.
Yeah, and so the education, everything, we didn't even know how far it could have gotten otherwise because at the education committee there was no love for bringing it in for discussion, which is part of the process, of course, to have it moving further to becoming law.
I'm very hopeful this year because now that we have a majority in the Democratic Party, the chairs and vice chairs of those committees that bring forward bills for hearings are some allies. The vice chair of the Education Committee is a representative that was endorsed by the Cannabis Caucus, Representative Jimmie from Grosse Ile. So I am hopeful that we will be able to get Jaden's Law, for instance, heard in her committee. And I'm hopeful that some of our reform efforts will actually be taken up in regulatory committee because my boss, Rep. Wilson, along with a few other reps that are approachable to our interests and efforts, do sit on that committee now.
that is a lot more promising. And I know that Representative Colazar is on the Education Committee too.
He is the chair of the Education Committee.
Not necessarily a champion of cannabis or anything like that, but not an unreasonable person either. And
he's actually one of my previous to working in the hub, one of my reps I would knock doors for and be was friends with. Again, two people I think will be amenable to getting us a testimony. Have I had those discussions at this point? No, but we have a new makeup of the legislature, and I also think that some of our things like Jaden's Law don't have to be polarizing, right? We're talking about getting kids medication access. And so I am hoping that we'll see some bipartisan support. Some of these reform efforts do require higher majority votes to pass and end up on the governor's desk. So we do have to find ways to work across the aisle on this stuff as well.
And I'm more optimistic about that. I think that even some of the lawmakers who are currently there thinking about this issue, as I've had some discussions, there's been a lot of resentment over the years with how the majority has like pushed stuff through sometimes that has been a little bit so divisive that just those couple of majority votes are the difference in whether or not something passes, and that kind of rubs people the wrong way, not really having a legitimate balanced say in these decisions and things, and then it comes out in the wash. Now, as we said, this session we have a change in the leadership. Some of that's going on, and now the minority party is seeing what was going on, what they used to do when they were in the majority party.
Yeah, everything's swapped now.
And so the resentment level's kind of high, and you wonder, are you going to get any cooperation for anything as long as this stuff is going on, because there's that stress that takes place. But even I've seen over the years, through those stresses, I've still seen people come together and get these super majorities when it shouldn't even happen. Like, you can't get these guys to agree on anything when it comes to cannabis, and unfortunately mainly for unnecessary stupid stuff, they somehow get convinced to do this. And
that's one of my reasons I like this realm. Cannabis is unique because it really can bring a very diverse variety of people together. Right. And especially when we're talking about medical bills, right? But even some of the simplifications of just the process of the industry as a whole, and just some of, again, some protections for our caregivers. These are things that don't have to become super polarizing. I will say I'm a big advocate, being in the House in one of the offices, that we should be creating space for everyone to voice their opinions and try to work collectively on these types of issues. I am not leadership, so I do not have the sphere on how that goes. I will say a fun fact about our office is Representative Wilson is one of the 3 assistant majority floor leaders for the Democratic Caucus as well. So that is cool. Again, that we have, Representative Ayesh, another ally to a lot of cannabis initiatives, is our majority floor leader. So again, I'm hopeful. I really am. And, some of this may end up as messaging bills still, but that's okay too, because a bigger thing is the destigmatization, the normalization, figuring out the best systems, and we have to keep those conversations going. So do I think we will win every single thing we go after? Probably not. And could we have something crazy come up? Maybe, but I'm not hearing that really right now.
So there's some discussions of things. I know that I'd like to get somebody to get the deschedule bill up and running again. Maybe we end up having that conversation with your office. I don't know, but we'll see. I've Representative Rabbi.
You need more work.
Representative Robbie, who's now a county commissioner in Washtenaw, who termed out as a House representative, did introduce a state deschedule bill, during his last session. And I've been talking to Senator Irwin's office about maybe picking up the torch on that. We'll see what happens, but I think that one's important, although that's in just discussion, phase right now. Yeah. There's discussion of combining the commercial licenses, and I'm depending on what that looks like, I'm personally okay with it, but it was tried not last session, but the session before, and I and others opposed it because of a bunch of other things that were included in it that weren't necessarily.
My most adamant goal will be to make sure we're bringing everyone to the table. We want all voices present, and our office will be strongly advocating to have very diverse working groups whenever these discussions are coming out.
And we didn't have that last session. They just started ramming stuff through like we're talking about. That's another example. There is resumed efforts I'm aware of to allow for tribal businesses to get into the metric system, to buy and sell from the metric system. That was tried last session. We didn't mind that concept, but they were trying to sneak in like a funding thing there that we didn't like, and so kind of was against that, but not the concept of inclusion of the tribal businesses. I mean,
it's so whenever we're looking
at
bills, the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah.
So we have to look at the language collectively, all of it, not just part of it. But yes, I have heard that one. I know Representative Coleman was collecting co-sponsorships this week for something that affects the industry, allowing individuals age 19 and up to work in the dispensaries, I believe is where he's targeting.
Yeah, because long as you have to be 21 to use it, but just to be able to facilitate the transfer and the sale.
Yeah, the transfer.
Right.
Yep. So again, a variety of different things. I also think that one of my hopes to combine both the advocacy hat I wear and the ledge director hat I wear is we're in some early discussions with some of our good activists like Rick Antis and Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters and the Caucus about doing some educational lobby days where we do like a luncheon, and we really start just having some, again, community spaces where we can talk about the experiences, the realities. A lot of the legislatures aren't coming to Hash Bash, right? They're not going into our dispensaries. They're not coming to our cannabis council nights. And we need to therefore create a space where they feel they can start having this conversation. And I've seen reps come to our dinner last cycle and start asking some questions that I thought would have already been answered by their time in the legislature, but weren't. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of bridge both our friends and allies that are in the legislature and our activist advocacy groups and do possible lobbying efforts together as well. And again, making them really just like educational lobbying efforts.
That's all. I mean, we've run into this issue many times, and what you describe, I think, is really important, because even some of the lawmakers who are generally in support of legalization, who are well-intended, don't have the right information often to make the best decision and to make a concerted effort to like get together and always be talking about this stuff when these decisions have to be made. I think maybe we would have done a better job on last session. There was a bill called House Bill 5512 that passed, and it probably had good intentions, and a lot of people had good intentions in supporting it. And it was about judges and specialty courts and how they handle people that want to use their medical marijuana. I don't get so deeply into it, but we think that some rights were taken away unnecessarily as a result, and that judges ultimately inappropriately end up in a position of making a medical decision, on behalf of people, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very difficult to work against a group of judges and high-powered lobbyists that want to see something get through. We were up against that, but had we had this extra communication, this automatically built-in, let's discuss this because it's a cannabis issue that's coming to light, we might have had a chance, because our information was important. I mean, might have been too little too late in some respects.
Yeah, and sometimes you are racing against the clock. Once a bill is introduced, it's going to go to committee. It could move fast. It could never move. Nothing's set in stone in Lansing, I will say.
Right.
You can plan, and then the wind changes and everything's different. But, I think that, again, sometimes realizing we tried to communicate, but I do think sometimes it was just too short of time. We couldn't get as much in as we needed to before it was going to move. And I want to be more intentional about the two hats that I wear and finding a way to bridge that.
Yeah. Anytime there's something about cannabis, we should be in on the details. And hey, maybe, if you don't, even if you think it doesn't relate to the perspective that we bring to the table, then that just means that we don't have much to say about it. But let's check it out, though. I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm really protective.
Well, I don't think it will be long before everyone realizes to come to Rep Wilson's office to bug us.
And, I'm really happy, and I just want to go back a little bit about him, I guess, while I'm thinking about it. And before we wrap up, we kind of gone a while, but we could talk about a lot of, stuff for quite a while because of the energy that you bring to this whole thing and the position that you're in. It's really, Rep Wilson was maybe the only person who was rational and made sense on the Ypsilanti township board. And I remember knowing that the current rep was going to be term limiting out, Ronnie Peterson, not a bad guy, but on the wrong side of history with cannabis in some respects. So we didn't really like that. and he had somebody handpicked. I'm like, and I mentioned to him, I'm sure other people did too, but I'm like, man, you should be the person who takes that position. And he's like, no, I can't right now. I got a lot going on with work and my family and that type of stuff. But a while later, he did get a hold of me. He goes, you know what? I think I am going to look into that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, all right. And then you and I held a fundraiser for him to help like kind of kick
Yep.
him off in Ypsilanti. And that went really well, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he won, man. And, he's there and you're there
Yeah.
working with him. And that's just perfect. I mean,
I will say Rep Wilson, I remember when he called me to tell me he's running, and I told him, no way, Jamie and I said it should be you.
yes, we had those discussions. I know. And you, by the way, you live in Ypsilanti for reference for people
Yep.
too. So it's like
Yeah.
very important to you to know
So I
who's
was going to
representing
say,
him.
I live in Ypsilanti City. I'm in the heart of downtown, and then Rep Wilson and then our constituent director, Rebecca Mackey, are both in Ypsi Township. Rep Wilson has, as Jamie, you alluded to, been an ally for a long time to the community, wanting to create space for us, give rational thought into it. Just this week, I heard him say in a committee meeting how important it was to still center patients and caregivers. But that extends into so much more. It just is how he works with connecting with people. His roots go deep in this community. And so I was very honored to be able to volunteer and knock doors for him. And I'm very excited when he asked me to come on. I've been a policy nerd forever, working on the Cannabis Caucus as well as the Young Dems and several other campaigns. So I was very excited for the ledge director spot. And it's cool to me because Rep Wilson and I sit in the office and we're talking about everyday people, from, friends and families of ours in our trailer parks that need help, all the way up to, professors and deans that we've been friends with for years. But, it really is unique to be able to have our cannabis caregivers stop into our office to come and have a conversation with us. And I'm really glad that he's created that space right now. And I'm very excited. He's really focused on our, representing our interests, but also on a lot of labor reform and a lot of criminal justice reform, a lot of housing and a lot of education. And Ypsi needs that, but Michigan needs that. So it's unique, and we're here to be an ally to this industry to help guide you guys to the community, and to fight for what we know we need.
Right on, man. And that's why we feel a little bit safer about this session.
Yeah, the
last
vibe
time.
is a little bit better. We got work
Yeah.
to do, but
Yeah.
our chances are much nicer, and the energy is much better.
Right on. And as things come up, of course, here's some communication that we didn't have before, and
Mhm.
and all types of stuff. So, as is the case with these videos and the people that we have discussions with, there's always some updates to be had down the road, and we'll look at coming back around and seeing what actually is going on a little bit further into the session, and
Yeah, we'll see what
what
actually
type of
gets
thing we're doing.
introduced,
Yeah.
and can update on what committees they're in. Because something that intersects beautifully with you and your groups is we will need people to come testify. Come tell us your story. Come tell us why this is important. And our office intends on trying to communicate with everyone to let you know about those bills, but oftentimes it's a short notice. So we want to have that communication, but it's a great opportunity to make sure, again, that they're seeing everyday people, the patients, the caregivers, pediatric patients, the dispo bud tenders. Let's bring those people into their committee hearings and really put it in front of some legislatures that just aren't in that realm themselves.
Perfect. We'll end with that. And again, we'll see you in one of these in the future and out in the real world at large. And
It'd be an honor to come back, Jamie. I appreciate you having me.
of course. And we'll talk very soon. Thanks, Leah. Talk to you soon.